She should not have been there. The mating ritual was sacred, reserved only for the chosen, and she was nothing more than a servant hidden among the trees. But that night, as the Alpha King walked among the women guided by instinct, something unexpected happened. He stopped, drew in a breath, and then he caught a scent that should not have existed there. His golden eyes found hers in the darkness, and the next instant, she was already running through the forest. What she did not expect was that the Alpha King himself would abandon the ritual and come after her. Why would the most powerful ruler in the kingdom be chasing a nameless servant? What was it about her that made an alpha's instinct tremble before the entire pack? As she flees between the trees, one question echoes in her mind. Why is the Alpha King hunting me? And the answer could change the fate of the entire kingdom. The moon was high in the center of the sky when Alina realized she had made the greatest mistake of her life. She was hidden among the trees of the forest, only a few yards from the sacred clearing, and her heart was pounding so loudly that she feared she might be discovered because of it alone. The heat from the bonfires reached her in uneven waves, and the sound of the drums rose and fell like a living, primitive breath, unlike anything she had ever heard within the walls of Lady Ivy's castle. Why did I come here? It had started the night before, in the small, stuffy room she shared with 3 other women. The conversation had begun the way it always did when the wine ran out and sleep refused to come, with Marta describing what Lyra's grandmother had once said about the night of the silver moon. "Once a year," Marta said, in that voice she used when she knew she was about to tell something impressive. "On the first full moon of spring, the entire pack gathers in a clearing deep in the forest, bonfires at the 4 corners, drums beating all night. And in the center of the circle, the Alpha enters." "For what?" Alina asked, even though she already knew the question was a trap. Marta smiled. "To choose." The silence that followed was deliberate. Marta had a gift for that. "They say that on that night the wolf takes over," she continued more slowly. "That the moon does something to them, awakens something ancient that the human form holds back the rest of the time. And then the Alpha walks among the women who volunteer to stand in the circle and sense the air, chooses by instinct." She paused. "It isn't the man who decides. It's the wolf." "And the women accept that?" Alina asked. "For many, it's an honor. Their families receive the blessing of the pack, prosperity, protection." Marta shrugged. "For others, it's the hope of being recognized by destiny. It depends on what you believe." Lyra, who had been listening quietly with her knees hugged to her chest in the corner of the bed, spoke softly. "My grandmother says it's forbidden to watch. Only those who take part in the ritual are allowed in the clearing." That afternoon they had decided to compete to see who could fill the most buckets of water from the well before the dinner bell rang. Whoever ended up with the smallest number would face the punishment. The loser would have to sneak into the forest to spy on the silver moon ritual, and then return to tell the others everything. "Well then." Marta turned to Alina with a smile that already knew the outcome of the wager. Alina had accepted the challenge with the careless arrogance of someone who believes she is going to win. She did not win. And there she was. The clearing was exactly as Marta had described, and at the same time completely different. Larger. Quieter than it seemed from afar, despite the drums, as though the air around that circle of stones carried an ancient weight that muffled any trivial thought. The bonfires were enormous, 4 of them, and the light they cast was golden and unstable, full of shadows dancing along the edges of the forest. The entire pack was present, hundreds of people wrapped in the rhythm of the drums. Alina understood now what Marta had tried to explain. It was not just a ritual. There was a weight in that space, a gravity she could feel in her bones without being able to name it, something between reverence and danger, between the sacred and the wild. And in the center of the circle stood him. Alina had never seen the Alpha King Elias of Starvale before. She had heard about him, of course, Everyone in the castle had. The maids whispered about him whenever Lady Ivy was not nearby. Too tall to be normal, blonde like wheat at the end of summer, eyes that change color. But none of those words had prepared Alina for what she was seeing now. At that moment, his back was turned to her as he walked slowly before the young women lined up within the circle. His body was large, broad through the shoulders, and his skin glistened faintly with the sweat of the ritual. Not the ugly sweat of hard labor Alina knew well, but something different, as though the heat of the bonfires themselves had entered him and stayed there. His blonde hair was tied at the nape of his neck, and every step he took was slow and deliberate, the stride of someone who never needed to hurry because nothing in the world would dare move before he commanded it. It isn't the man who decides, it's the wolf. Marta's words returned at exactly the wrong moment. Alina pushed them away. The drums struck 3 times, louder than before. Instinctively, she pressed herself against the trunk of the nearest tree. Leave. Leave now. But her feet did not obey. He stopped. It was not a slow or hesitant pause. It was abrupt, as though something invisible had jerked him to a halt. His entire body went tense. She saw his shoulders rise, his spine straighten, his head tilt slightly to the side like an animal scenting the air. Alina's heart stopped. He cannot see me. I'm hidden. There's no way. Then he turned his head, slowly, as though he knew exactly where to look. His eyes found hers through the distance and the darkness, and they shone. It was not a metaphor. It was real, physical, a fierce golden glow that cut through the yards between them as though there were no trees, no night, and no absurdity in a servant girl hiding at the edge of a sacred ceremony she had no right to witness. Alina turned and ran. She ran without direction, without a plan, her arms raised to shield her face from the branches, wet leaves lashing against her legs. The bonfires fell behind her. The drums fell behind her. The moon remained, white and enormous above the canopy, as though it were watching every step she took with an attention that made her even more nervous. Stupid. 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 Behind her, the clearing erupted in voices. Elias had taken 2 steps toward the forest when the ceremonial guards closed in front of him. There were 4 of them, the finest warriors of the pack, chosen specifically to protect the integrity of the ritual. None of them wanted to be in that position. None of them wanted to restrain their own king. But the law was the law, and the ritual was the ritual, and both had existed longer than any of them had been alive. Your Majesty. The oldest guard raised his hand, his voice steady despite the visible effort. The ritual has not been completed. Move aside. The law of the pack. Move aside. Elias's voice had changed. It was no longer simply deep. It carried something heavier, the authority of an alpha that is neither learned nor performed, something that rises from a place below speech and above instinct. The pack around them stepped back half a pace without thinking, the body reacting before the mind could process anything. But the guards did not move. Elias tried to push forward. The nearest guard seized his arm, and what happened next was too fast for most to see clearly. There was a low sound, a growl that did not come from his throat, but from deep in his chest. Something not entirely human. And Elias's eyes flared gold again, brighter now, more unstable. His wolf was awake. And it was angry. The pack retreated further. Even the elders stepped back. Elias tried to advance a second time. 2 guards held his arms, and the effort it cost them was obvious. They were not restraining merely a man, but something larger, something pressing against every physical limit, like water against a dam. His body trembled. The muscles in his shoulders tightened in a way that was not natural. An alpha does not abandon the ritual. The law has existed since the earliest times, but instinct is older than any law. The growl came again, and this time something came with it. A tremor in the bones of his hands, his fingers curling differently for a moment. Elias closed his eyes. He took a deep breath, once, twice, 3 times, visibly fighting something that clearly refused to be contained. When he opened his eyes, the decision had already been made. It was not graceful. It rarely is. Transformation is not a spectacle, but a surrender. And when Elias surrendered that internal battle, what slipped from the guard's grasp was no longer the man who had entered the ritual circle. It was a wolf far too large to be comfortable, its pale coat almost golden in the light of the bonfires, its eyes burning with fierce amber. The guard stepped back. The pack parted. The wolf vanished into the forest. Alina was still running, and the only sound that existed for her was her own breath escaping in clouds of cold vapor and the dull thud of her footsteps on the damp earth. The forest closed dark and dense around her. Filled with roots her eyes could not follow at the speed her legs were moving. Her right foot struck something solid hidden beneath the leaves. The world spun. She had no time to react, only the sensation that the ground had vanished beneath her feet, and suddenly she was tipping too far forward, her arms flailing through the air with nothing to grasp. The slope began abruptly, invisible in the darkness, and Alina tumbled sideways down it, instinctively trying to clutch anything, branches, roots, the soil itself, and finding nothing. The incline was covered with wet leaves and slick moss, and the descent was fast and chaotic, a fall that did not stop, each impact replaced by another before she could process the last. A branch tore the sleeve of her dress. Her shoulder slammed into something hard, a rock, a thick root, and the blow flipped the world upside down for a moment. Then the trunk. The entire left side of her body crashed into the oak tree below with a force that knocked every bit of air from her lungs at once. Alina lay on her side on the cold earth, trying to breathe and failing, her eyes wide, her mouth open, but no sound coming out. It took several seconds. The air returned in a long, painful inhale, and with it came all the pain at once. The shoulder, the right rib, the knees that had struck at least twice during the fall, the palm of her left hand that had tried to break her descent and managed only to scrape raw against the ground. "You need to get up," she tried. The world spun again. She gave up for a moment, her cheek pressed against the cold leaves, breathing slowly and carefully because deep breaths hurt along her ribs. She remained like that for a time she could not measure, until the dizziness eased enough that sitting up seemed possible. When she finally did manage to sit, the moon had dropped lower in the sky, and she had absolutely no idea which direction led back to the castle. Wonderful. She even tried to laugh at herself, but her right rib did not allow it. When the wolf reached the place where she had been, the trail was everywhere. Scattered leaves, churned earth, the entire slope marked by the chaotic path of her fall. And the scent that had interrupted the oldest ritual of his pack, was soaked into the ground, mingled with wet soil and moss, spread across the whole length of the slope without pointing in any single direction. Elias scented the air for a long time. Nothing. The trail had vanished. He stood motionless in the middle of the slope, his body still carrying the weight of the transformation, the dull ache in the bones that always came afterward, and beneath it something else, harder to name. An absence that hurt like a presence. The kind of pain a wolf feels when it is separated from something it recognized as its own before the mind ever had the chance to agree or refuse. Who are you? The wind carried the scent of the forest. Nothing else. Elias walked back to the castle on foot, in the dark, already in human form, with the wolf still unsettled inside him. Restless, insistent, refusing to accept defeat with the same calm his rational mind was trying to impose. The ache in his bones was not severe, but it was constant. The urge to turn around and go back did not fade until the castle came into view. Alina returned to Lady Ivy's castle on the night of the day after the ritual. She came in through the back, climbed the servants' staircase carefully so as not to make a sound, and found the room still lit. The candle by Marta's bed was still burning, which meant the three of them had been waiting for her. She stopped in the doorway. "You disappeared. We thought you had—" Marta was sitting on the edge of the bed, wearing the expression of someone who knew a good story was coming. "What happened?" Alina tossed her damp shawl onto the trunk and started taking off her mud-caked shoes. "I left early. I got scared of the guards." "Early?" Lyra leaned forward. "You were gone for a whole day." "I tripped on the slope near the clearing. I fell, hit my shoulder, and ended up getting lost on the way back." "How did you fall?" "I didn't see a route in the dark." Alina dropped one of her shoes harder than she meant to. "My rib still hurts." Marta frowned, studying the torn sleeve of her dress, and the mud streaked all the way up to her knee. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine." A lie. She did not know whether she was fine. Her heart still had not returned to its normal rhythm, and every time she closed her eyes, she saw the golden shine of those eyes in the darkness of the forest. It was Lyra who broke the silence that followed. "People are talking about what happened. My grandmother said she had never seen anything like it." Alina stopped handling her shoe. "Seen what?" "The Alpha King abandoning the ritual." Lyra looked at her. He was standing in the center, at the moment of the choosing, and suddenly everything stopped. He tried to leave twice. The guards had to hold him back. She paused. "My grandmother said that in all her life, she had never seen an alpha do that. The ritual is never abandoned. Never." The room fell silent. "And then he shifted," Lyra said even more softly. "Right there, in front of everyone. He ran toward the forest as if the whole world had stopped existing." Marta scoffed. "It was probably some animal that caught the wolf's attention." "My grandmother says it wasn't. She says he sensed someone outside the circle." Lyra looked at Alina with a curiosity that held no malice at all. "Could it have been you?" Alina's heart gave one hard thud. "Of course not," she said, and her voice came out drier than she intended. "I'm just a human and a servant." The others laughed. The kind of laugh that is more relief than humor. The laugh people give because the idea is too absurd to take seriously. Lyra was still smiling when she said, with that particular sweetness of hers that Alina had learned to recognize as genuine, "But if you ever become queen, will you choose me as your lady-in-waiting?" They all laughed. It was a joke. Obviously it was. But there was something in Lyra's voice that was not entirely a joke. There was the tenderness of someone saying, "I would like to stay close to you," and Alina knew the difference. She looked at Lyra for a moment. "Unfortunately, I'm nobody," she said, and this time the dryness was gone. There was only plain, unvarnished truth. "But I will always take care of you." Lyra smiled for real. Alina blew out the candle, lay down with mud still on her knees, and stared at the dark ceiling for a long time. The silence of the night, and the stubborn memory of golden eyes that had found hers, as if they knew exactly where to look. She remained like that for a long time, lying in silence, her eyes fixed on the dark ceiling of the room, while her thoughts still raced restlessly inside her. Her heart was slow to calm, as though some part of her were still lost in that forest. The memory of the golden eyes, of the way he had stopped, of the way he had tried to leave. Little by little, though, the weight of exhaustion began to overpower the tension in her muscles. Her body sank into the narrow mattress. Her eyelids grew heavy. When sleep finally took her, it came deep and inevitable, and the dream did not take long to follow. Suddenly, she was in the forest again. But this time there were no bonfires. There were no drums. No crowd. Only the moon. Silver light fell through the trees in long, silent bands, painting the forest floor in cold shadow. And him. He was there, a few yards away, with his back to her. The same tall frame, the broad shoulders, the hair pulled into the loose knot she had seen in the clearing. His skin still seemed warm, even beneath the cold moonlight. Alina held her breath. She knew she should leave. Even so, she did not move, as if some deeper part of her had decided to stay. He turned slowly, very slowly, more slowly than he had in the clearing, as if he already knew she was there. As if he knew that this time she would not run. Those golden eyes found hers, and the world seemed to grow smaller. He began to walk, each step silent on the dry leaves. Alina did not back away. She could not. When he stopped, he was too close. Close enough that she could feel the heat of his body in the cold forest air. Close enough that she had to tilt her face up to keep looking at him. The movement exposed her throat. And from the way his eyes dropped there for a moment, he noticed. The silence between them had weight. The kind of silence that is not empty. It is too full. His hand rose slowly. Slowly enough that Alina had time to feel every second of him closing the distance. His fingers touched her chin. Only the lightest touch. But it was enough to send a shiver down her entire spine. She held her breath. "So it was you," he said. His voice was low, deep, and there was a quiet certainty in it that made her stomach tighten. "I felt you in the forest." His fingers were still beneath her chin, lifting her face just enough. "You ran from me." Alina tried to answer. I didn't." Her voice failed. Those golden eyes were far too close, watching every reaction with a patience that was almost unnerving. "You stayed hidden," he went on calmly. "Watching." His thumb moved beneath her chin, only slightly. "Why?" She swallowed hard. "I wasn't supposed to be there." He tilted his head. The gesture was almost curious. "You weren't." But the way he said it did not sound like a rebuke. It sounded like something else, something slower, more dangerous. His gaze dropped, from her face to her throat, and lingered there a second longer than it should have. Alina's body reacted before she could stop it. Heat rose through her chest. "Do you have any idea," he said softly, "what you did when you appeared in that clearing?" She blinked. "I didn't do anything." A very small smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. "No?" He took half a step closer. Now there was no space left between them. His heat surrounded her completely. "My wolf stopped the entire ritual." Her heart thudded hard. "Tried to go after you." His hand was still holding her chin, firmly enough that she could not look anywhere else. "That does not happen." His warm breath touched her face. "Ever." Her heart was racing. I didn't mean to." "I know." His voice dropped lower, closer. And yet it happened. Those golden eyes were locked on hers, intense. "Now I want to understand why." His thumb slid slowly along the line of her jaw. Alina felt the shiver rise through her again. "What are you, little intruder?" The nickname came out almost like a murmur, and something inside her tightened. "I'm nobody." He went completely still for a moment. Then he let out a quiet breath, almost a laugh. "No." His eyes darkened slightly. "You are definitely not nobody." His hand slid from her chin to her throat. Not squeezing, just resting there. Warm, heavy. Her heart felt ready to leap out of her chest. "I felt you," he murmured. His face was very close now, even when I could not see you. He tilted his head, slowly. as though measuring the distance between them. "And now that I've found you," his warm breath brushed her lips, "do you really think you'll run again?" The world seemed to stop. Her body answered before her mind could gather a single thought. But the sentence never ended. Because the dream shattered. Alina woke with a start, her heart racing, her breath short, the room dark around her, the other maids asleep. She stayed perfectly still for a few seconds. The heat was still on her skin. The memory of his touch was still at her throat, as if it had been real. She ran a hand across her forehead, confused. What was that? She lay back down again, her eyes fixed on the dark ceiling. This is ridiculous. But it took far longer than it should have for her heart to return to its normal rhythm, and even longer before she could fall asleep again. The council meeting took place the following morning, at Starvale Castle, leagues away. Elias entered the chamber without waiting to be announced. The councillors were already gathered around the long oak table, and on their faces he recognized a mixture of concern and caution. He sat down. He did not wait. "Speak." The eldest councillor, Aldrich, folded his hands on the table. "Your Majesty, what happened on the night of the ritual was without precedent. It happened because my wolf recognized another woman." Elias had no patience for careful phrasing. "A woman who was not standing in the ritual circle." The silence that followed had weight. "Recognized," Aldrich repeated, with deliberate care on that word. In the sense that the ritual was interrupted because my wolf refused to continue." Elias looked at each of them in turn. "That is what happened. That is what I have to say." The councillors exchanged glances. "Your Majesty." Another man, Koran, leaned forward. "The agreement with Lady Ivy existed before the ritual. The terms were clear. Regardless of the outcome of the night of the silver moon, the alliance would be confirmed. The wedding ceremony was meant to take place here in Starvale. The kingdoms are waiting. I know what was agreed. Then you understand that canceling this union, I know what needs to be done." Elias's voice did not rise. It never did. It was never necessary. "I will go to Lady Ivy's castle myself. I will go there and break the agreement." Aldrich parted his lips. "With all due respect, Your Majesty," he said slowly, "even if the agreement is dissolved, if you cannot identify who this woman is, I will find her. You do not know who she is. My wolf knows her scent." Elias stood, and she was close enough to the ritual that I could feel her among hundreds of people. That is not a coincidence. The council fell silent. Inside, and only inside, because Elias had learned never to let the wolf steer a political meeting, there was a low, steady fury burning every time someone suggested that the agreement with Lady Ivy carried more weight than what had happened in that clearing. The wolf understood neither agreements nor treaties, nor the delicate balances the councillors guarded as though they were their own lives. The wolf understood only one thing. There was a woman. She had run, and he needed to find her. The man could keep that under control, for now. "I'm going to Lady Ivy's castle," Elias said, straightening his clothing with the gesture of a man ending a conversation without asking permission to end it. "I will dissolve the agreement. I will return free to search for the one I need to find." He paused. "Any objections?" No one answered. Elias stepped out into the stone corridor, alone for a moment before the guards caught up with him. He stopped and took a deep breath. The ache in his bones had eased with the little sleep he had managed, but it was still there, dull and constant. The urge to find her had not eased in the slightest. 2 days later, the riders of Starvale appeared on the stone road leading to Lady Ivy's castle. Alina was kneeling beside the fountain in the main courtyard, scrubbing the stones with the same worn rag as always, and a bucket of dirty water beside her, when the chill ran through her. Before she heard the horses. Before she heard the guard's announcement. Before anything visible or audible. Only a shiver climbing up her spine, and a strange sensation, as if the very air around her had changed weight. What was that? She kept scrubbing the ground, kept her eyes on the stones. She heard the clatter of hooves on the courtyard cobblestones, the sound of the horses being reined in, the guard's voice carrying that particular pomp reserved for visitors who truly mattered. Alpha King Elias of Starvale. She lifted her eyes. It was involuntary, instinctive, the way your head turns toward a sudden sound before your mind understands what is happening. And she found the golden eyes she had seen in the forest clearing. Her hand let go of the bucket. The dirty water spread across the courtyard stones in a dark, perfect stain, and the silence that fell over that space was so complete that for one terrible second, Alina believed everyone had stopped to look at her. No. No. Her face burned. She lowered her eyes quickly, reached for the bucket, tried to move like someone who had just made a small, meaningless mistake, tried to make herself invisible with the skill that years of service had taught her. But when she looked again, only for a second, to make sure the moment had passed, he had stopped walking. He stood in the middle of the courtyard, between his riders and the main staircase where Lady Ivy waited with her practiced smile, and he stood completely still. His eyes found hers with that same unsettling precision from the forest. No hesitation. No doubt. As if I were the only person in this courtyard. Your Majesty, Lady Ivy's voice drifted down the staircase like cold silk. What an honor to receive Starvale in my castle. The king looked away from Alina for an instant, only an instant, and inclined his head toward the staircase. Lady Ivy. His voice was deep, low, the kind of voice that needs no effort to be heard. The honor is mine. But as he started up the steps, he cast one last glance over his shoulder, at her. I know exactly who you are, he said, not loudly. Only for her, with that strange, steady certainty in his voice, like someone not announcing a discovery, but confirming something he had already known. And then he climbed the staircase and disappeared into the castle. Alina stood motionless for 3 seconds that felt like 3 years. Then she grabbed the empty bucket, got to her feet, and left as quickly as she could. Alina slipped in through the back of the castle and pressed herself against the cold stones of the dark corridor, her heart pounding far too hard. What was that? That night, she dreamed of him again. The dining hall in Lady Ivy's castle was the most beautiful room Alina knew, and she knew that castle inside and out. Even so, the hall always seemed different when it was prepared to receive important guests. The high ceiling disappeared into the golden shadows cast by the candle-lit chandeliers, and the light trembled softly across the stone walls and the long, dark oak table that stretched the full length of the room. Alina stood near the sideboard with a wine pitcher in her hands, beside 2 other maids. It was a good position for watching without being watched, and she worked hard to look exactly like what everyone expected her to be. Part of the setting. Invisible. That worked until Elias entered the hall. He came in last. Lady Ivy was already seated at the head of the table, elegant as always. The conversation softened when he crossed the room. Not because anyone had asked for silence, but because his presence had that natural effect, the kind of authority that effortlessly rearranges the space around it. Elias walked with unhurried ease, speaking in a low voice with one of the men from his own retinue, and only broke off the conversation when he reached the chair reserved for him at Lady Ivy's right, the seat of honor. Before sitting down, his eyes swept across the hall. They stopped on Alina. Who would have thought I'd find you here? A silent thought crossed his mind, with the same dangerous calm that guided nearly everything he did. I did not even have to look for you. Then he looked away as if nothing had happened, settled into his chair, and let the conversation around him resume its natural flow, though some part of him remained strangely alert to the presence of the servant standing by the sideboard. Alina took a deep breath, focusing on the pitcher in her hands. It was nothing. He was only assessing the room. That was what alphas did. Dinner began. The conversation at the table carried that carefully constructed lightness that was not lightness at all. Quiet laughter, comments about travel, about the weather in the mountains, about harvests and roads, safe subjects. But beneath every sentence there was calculation. Every pause seemed deliberate. Every change of topic was an elegant way of testing boundaries. Lady Ivy steered it all with the ease of someone who had spent her entire life at tables like that, guiding the discussion with small interventions and gently redirecting whenever anything drifted too close to dangerous ground. "Your Majesty," she said at one point, lifting her glass toward Elias with an elegant gesture, "I have heard your kingdom is thriving. Starvale seems to grow stronger with every season." "My people are loyal," Elias replied. His voice carried across the table. It did not need to assert itself. Silence adjusted around it naturally. Lady Ivy inclined her head slightly. "Loyalty is a rare resource, especially in times of change." She took a small sip of wine before continuing, her gaze sharp, measuring every reaction from him. "I imagine that is why well-chosen alliances become so important." Elias did not answer right away. He lifted the glass to his lips, drank, and only then turned his eyes back to her. "That is exactly why I intend to speak with you personally about this marriage." Lady Ivy had not expected such a direct answer. For one very brief instant, one of those moments only someone watching closely would have noticed, something uncomfortable passed through her expression before the smile returned to its place. "Of course," she said softly. "We will discuss it calmly." She set her glass on the table and leaned slightly toward him, curiosity in her eyes. "And the ritual? I heard what happened." Elias looked at her. The silence that followed was brief, but heavy. "I do not want to discuss it." Lady Ivy arched her brows slightly, without losing her polite tone. "Understandable. Even so, I must admit I have never been a great admirer of that kind of tradition, especially now that our houses are about to be joined." The golden eyes of Elias turned colder. "The pack's rituals and laws are not up for discussion." The reply landed on the table like a stone. Lady Ivy held his gaze for 1 second longer, then inclined her head again, accepting the boundary without pushing further. "Of course." The conversation continued. It shifted to another subject, as it always did at tables like that. But something in the air had changed. A quiet tension that lingered among the guests, like embers hidden beneath ash. Alina was called to circulate when the first glasses began to empty. She left the sideboard with the pitcher in her hands and began on the left side of the table, just as she had been taught. She moved silently between the chairs, filling one glass, then another, while the guests' eyes passed over her without really seeing her, until she reached Elias's place. She knew she would get there. She had spent much of the dinner aware of that fact, preparing herself for that moment, the way one prepares to cross a narrow stretch of thin ice. She was a maid, serving wine. Nothing more. She tipped the pitcher over his glass. The wine flowed down in a dark, silent stream. Elias's hand rested on the table beside the goblet, relaxed, fingers spread over the dark wood. Alina kept her eyes on the pitcher, focused on the precise movement, the right angle so she would not spill. Then he moved his hand. Only a small adjustment, casual, almost imperceptible. But now his fingers were closer, close enough for her to feel the heat of his skin before they even touched. Alina held her breath. Do not look at him. Do not look. She did not. She finished pouring, straightened the pitcher, took a step toward the next glass, and only then realized she had been holding her breath from the moment she came near him, and that her heart was beating with that inconvenient speed that had become far too familiar over the past few days. On the other side of the table, one of Lady Ivy's ladies whispered something to the woman beside her. The two of them glanced toward Alina for a second. She did not see it, but Lady Ivy did. Dinner lasted another 2 hours. Alina made 4 rounds with the pitcher. 3 of those times, when she reached Elias's side, she felt his gaze before she was even close enough to confirm it. It was not an obvious stare. He was always in the middle of some conversation, answering a question, playing the role of distinguished guest with the fluency of someone who had done it his entire life. But there was something in those golden eyes she could not ignore when she caught them by accident. Something that was not the casual look of a man assessing the person serving his table. It was recognition. "Stop imagining things," one part of her said. The other part stayed silent, and it was that silence that disturbed her most. On the last round, Lady Ivy intercepted her with a discreet gesture of the hand. Just a small movement that meant enough. You may go. Alina left the hall with the empty pitcher and the feeling that she had just been standing in the middle of something she did not fully understand. That night she could not sleep. It was not only the thought of him keeping her awake. It was the dinner, the tension that had run the length of the table like an invisible current, the way he looked at people when he spoke, calm, attentive, and the way that look changed when it landed on her. She turned to one side, then the other, closed her eyes. The entire dinner came back at once. The sound of glasses, the candles trembling in the chandeliers, and in the middle of it all, his presence, his eyes finding hers every time she passed close enough. It was not a long look. It was worse than that. It was too brief, and even so, it seemed to cut across the whole hall straight to her. Stop. Alina opened her eyes to the dark ceiling. You do not know him. But her body did not agree. Her body remembered the heat, the caught breath, the nearness that never quite happened and yet felt inevitable. She sat up on the narrow cot. The room was dark and quiet. The other maids were fast asleep, scattered across their narrow beds. Alina stood up. She had no particular destination. She only knew that staying there, staring at the ceiling, was a form of torture she was no longer willing to endure. She grabbed her shawl, opened the door slowly, and slipped out without making a sound. She climbed the narrow stone staircase that led to the northern battlements of the castle, the most isolated stretch, far from the guards' rounds, where she sometimes went when she needed air, silence, and not to be watched by anyone. The night up there was cold and clear. The moon was there with that silver light that made the castle and the forest below seem faintly unreal. Alina rested her hands on the stone parapet and took a deep breath. The cold air filled her lungs sharply, bringing a little clarity to the mind that had seemed to spin in circles all day. Better. She closed her eyes for a moment. That was when she felt it. A presence. As though some part of her had noticed before the rest of her body that she was no longer alone. Alina opened her eyes, turned around. Elias was there. A few yards away, leaning against the parapet on the opposite side of the battlement, his arms crossed and his gaze turned toward the dark line of the forest. He did not seem surprised. He did not look as though he had just arrived. He looked as if he knew exactly where to find her. She went still. He turned his head slowly toward her. I was wondering how long it would take. His voice was low, deep, carrying that dangerous calm she was already beginning to recognize. For what? Alina asked. For you to come to me. She frowned. I did not come to you. One corner of his mouth shifted, not exactly a smile. No. The silence between them thickened. I have been coming here for years, she said more firmly, long before you ever appeared at this castle. I did not say this place belonged to me. He pushed himself away from the parapet slowly. The movement was small, but it completely changed the distance between them. I said you would come. Alina's heart beat harder. I could not sleep, she said flatly. That is all. He studied her for a moment, too closely. Could not sleep? Or are you simply afraid of dreaming about me? Alina parted her lips, stunned. How does he know that? She thought. I do not dream about you, she lied. The smile that appeared on his face was small and slow, as if her answer were exactly the confirmation he had expected. The wind moved between them, lifting the shawl slightly over her shoulders. He took a step. Now he was close enough for her to feel again that absurd thing his body seemed to give off, heat, even in the cold before dawn. Do you know what my wolf did on the night of the ritual? She raised her chin. I heard it abandon the ceremony. The whole pack saw it. Yes. His golden eyes were fixed on hers. Because it felt you. The air seemed to grow heavier. You were in the trees, he continued, hidden, watching something you were not meant to see. Alina did not answer. My wolf stopped everything, he said lower now. Tried to come after you. He tilted his head slightly. That has never happened before. Her heart was beating far too fast. You are mistaken. I am not. He took another step. Now only an arm's length separated them. I spent the entire day trying to ignore this, Elias continued. The council, the dinner, the politics. His eyes dropped briefly to her mouth before returning to her eyes. It did not work. Alina felt heat rise through her chest. I do not know what you are talking about. You do. He said her name. Alina. She went still. I asked who you were after dinner, he said calmly. The silence that followed felt too full. You are my wolf's mate. The sentence fell between them. Direct. Impossible to refuse. And what about the agreement with Lady Ivy? Alina said, her voice sharper than she intended. You came here to marry her. I came here to break that agreement. She will not accept it. No. He stepped half a pace closer. Now his warmth was too near. But that is tomorrow's problem. Alina did not step back. She should have, but she did not. His golden eyes were more golden now, sharper. I am only a servant, Alina said firmly, trying to hold his gaze. I am not a wolf. I cannot be your mate. Elias looked at her for a moment, as though considering the logic of that. That is true, he said calmly, but destiny is not something to be questioned. His golden eyes remained locked on hers. And I am going to take you with me. Alina took a step back. I cannot go with you. You can. His voice remained low, but there was a quiet certainty in it. And with each day you keep refusing this, it will get worse for you. She frowned. Worse. You will beg for me. Alina let out a small, disbelieving laugh. I am not going anywhere with you. Not with a man who takes part in rituals with other women. A different gleam appeared in his eyes. Are you jealous? No. The answer came out too fast. One corner of his mouth curved slightly. The ritual only happens before alphas find their mates. It is part of tradition. He took a step. Now he was too close. Before she could react, his hand found her waist, firm, pulling her a little closer. Alina's heart slammed against her ribs. For a second she stood perfectly still, completely aware of the heat of his hand and the absurd closeness between them. Then she pulled free all at once. Turned and ran toward the stairs. Elias did not follow her. He only stood there, watching as she disappeared from the battlement. Then he laughed softly. "You are not going to run from me forever, Alina." Alina moved quickly across the stone of the battlement, her shawl clutched tightly against her chest, without looking back, because looking back would have been the end of whatever self-control she still had left. Elias heard her footsteps fading away, then the stair door opening and closing, and then there was only the wind and the night around him. He kept looking at the spot where she had been for a moment. She had almost stayed. She had been there, close enough, and she had almost stayed. He had seen in her eyes the same recognition the wolf inside him had been feeling for days. And then she had run. For the second time. Elias passed a hand over his face. Dear gods. Neither of them saw the shadow retreat into the stairwell as Alina ran past. Neither of them saw the eyes that had watched every word, every step, every second of that conversation on the battlement. Neither of them knew, that night, that Lady Ivy received the report before dawn, seated in her oak chair, a glass of wine in her hand that she was not drinking, her eyes fixed on the candle flame as she listened. When the report was finished, she remained silent for a moment. "You may go," she said at last. The shadow left. Lady Ivy kept staring at the flame for a while longer. Alina was asleep when the bedroom door opened. There was no knock. The door simply opened, and candlelight entered before the person carrying it did, and it took Alina a second to wake fully, and another second to recognize who was standing in the doorway. Lady Ivy. Lady Ivy, in person, at 2 a.m, in the maid's room, with a candle in one hand, a dark silk robe, and the expression of someone unaccustomed to making this kind of visit, and unconcerned with making that obvious. The other maids woke one by one. Marta sat up abruptly on her cot. Lyra opened her eyes, and went still at once, instinctively. The silence in the room was the kind no one dared to break. Lady Ivy let her gaze sweep across the room until it found Alina. Then it stopped. "Get up," she said. Her voice was low, almost gentle. Alina had learned long ago that Lady Ivy's low, almost gentle voice was the most dangerous version of her. Alina stood. She remained beside her cot, barefoot on the cold stone, her hair loose and her eyes still heavy with sleep, and waited. Lady Ivy stepped into the room, only one step more, just enough for the door to be closed behind her. Her eyes moved over Alina from head to toe with that calculated slowness that was itself a form of humiliation. "You know why I'm here," she said. It was not a question yet. "No, ma'am." Lady Ivy tilted her head slightly. "A lie." Her eyes did not change. "I know what happened on the battlements tonight. I know what was said. I know what almost happened." A deliberate pause. "And you are standing here thinking that means something for you." The room was utterly silent. Marta had stopped breathing. Lyra sat rigid on her cot, her eyes fixed on Lady Ivy with the expression of someone who wants to say something and understands she cannot. Lady Ivy did not look at either of them. She kept her eyes on Alina. "Let me explain what it means," she continued, her voice still low, still almost gentle. "You are an orphaned servant. You were 8 years old when you came here. You have no name that matters. There is no one who will ask where you are if you simply are no longer here." She took another step, slowly, as though time itself belonged to her as well. "You went up to the battlements tonight and stood beside him and thought, what?" Lady Ivy's eyes traveled over Alina from head to toe with a slowness that was not assessment, but demolition. "That he saw you? That it meant something?" The silence was not an invitation. It was a trap. "He did not see you." Her voice stayed low, stayed almost gentle. "Men like him do not see women like you. You are the ground he walks on. You are the stone he does not notice. You are the hand that dusts a table while his eyes are fixed on something else. A small pause. You could scrub these floors on your knees for 40 years and he would never know your name. That is the only place that exists for you in this castle. And somehow you forgot that. The cold of the stone climbed through Alina's feet, up her ankles, into her legs, and she did not move. That he may have had a moment of... Lady Ivy made the faintest motion with her free hand, as if brushing away a fly. Generosity or boredom, or whatever it was you mistook for attention, does not change what you are. Her eyes met Alina's and stayed there, unblinking. You are going to take your things, Lady Ivy said, and you are going to leave this castle now. Now. A small pause. Or I will make sure you do not leave at all. Her eyes held Alina's. Choose. Then Lady Ivy slowly turned her head toward Marta and Lyra. They were still frozen on their cots, and both of them wore that particular expression of fear that belongs to people witnessing something they should not be witnessing and knowing it. As for the two of you... Lady Ivy's voice did not rise. It remained in that same low, soft tone, which made it even more effective. If I hear that a single word leaves this room about what was said here tonight... She paused, letting the silence do the work for her. The dungeon has been empty for some time. It would be a shame to waste it. Marta went pale. Lyra looked down at the floor. No one said a word. Lady Ivy turned her eyes back to Alina, satisfied with the silence, and waited. I'll get my things, Alina said. Lady Ivy looked at her for one moment longer, evaluating, confirming, and then turned and left the room without another word, taking the candle with her and leaving everything in darkness. The silence that remained was different, heavier. Lyra was the first to move. She slipped off her cot without making a sound, crossed the dark room to Alina, and hugged her, quickly, tightly, with a strength far out of proportion to her size, which Alina had not expected, and that was precisely what made it the hardest thing to bear. You did nothing wrong, Lyra whispered. Alina stood still for a second inside that embrace. Then she gently pulled away, because if she stayed another moment, something would happen that she could not allow herself. Take care of yourself, Alina said. Lyra said nothing. There were tears on her face she was not trying to hide, and somehow that was harder to face than everything Lady Ivy had said. Alina picked up the small bundle from beneath her cot, the few things that were truly hers, and went to the door. She did not look back. If she had, she would not have been able to leave. The road from the castle was dark and long. Alina walked with the bundle tucked in her arm and her feet shoved into the worn shoes she had put on in a hurry. The castle gate was falling behind her, the stone road turning into dirt, the trees on either side slowly closing in. You have no family. You have no name that matters. There is no one who will ask where you are. She remembered Lady Ivy's words. She had known that for years. But hearing it said like that, in that voice, in that room, in front of Lyra and Marta, had made the truth settle differently, with a weight she could still feel on her shoulders. You were 8 years old when you came here. She remembered the child she had been, delivered to Lady Ivy's castle with very little explanation. Only that her parents had died, that there was no one left, that the castle needed maids, and she needed somewhere to go. Where am I going? That was the question she had avoided ever since leaving the castle. The honest answer was that she did not know. There was a village a few leagues away. There might be a chance of finding work at an inn in a kitchen, somewhere that needed someone willing to work without asking questions. She tightened her grip on the bundle against her chest and kept walking. A few hours earlier, on the other side of the castle, Elias had asked for a private meeting with Lady Ivy. When they were finally alone, the silence between them hung like stone. Lady Ivy walked slowly to the table, pouring wine into 2 glasses with the calm of someone who used every gesture to buy time. Her movements were precise, controlled. "So," she said, with a smile that did not reach her eyes, "I imagine you came to confirm our union." Elias did not touch the glass. "I came to cancel it." The smile vanished. For a few seconds, Lady Ivy simply stared at him, as if she had heard something her mind refused to accept. "Cancel it," she repeated slowly, the word leaving her mouth like something she had to examine before accepting its weight. "The agreement between our kingdoms. My wolf chose someone else." Her eyes hardened. "That servant girl." The word came out like poison, short, precise. "She is not just a servant girl," Elias replied. Lady Ivy laughed. There was no humor in the sound. It carried the sharp edge of a woman holding too much together with too much effort and beginning to let it spill through the cracks. "A human who scrubs the floors of my castle," she said, every word enunciated with the clarity of someone making certain she is understood. "Made the Alpha King of Starvale abandon a sacred ritual and break an agreement between kingdoms." She took a few steps toward him. "Do you understand what you are doing? The kingdoms are expecting this union. My people are expecting it. Your arrival here was taken as confirmation. You moved too quickly in your assumptions." "I moved too quickly?" Lady Ivy stopped a few feet from him, and there was something in her eyes that went beyond wounded pride. There was the cold calculation of someone rapidly rearranging the possibilities in front of her. "Do you know what it means for me to be rejected like this? What my kingdom will say when it learns that the Alpha King cast me aside for a nameless servant with no family?" "What your kingdom says is your matter to resolve," Elias said, his voice perfectly mild. "What my wolf recognized is not negotiable." The silence that followed was different from the ones before it, tighter, more dangerous. Lady Ivy turned slowly, walked to the window, and stood looking out at the courtyard below for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice had changed. Lower, quieter, and for that very reason, more frightening. "Then I hope," she said without turning around, "that you understand what you are risking." A deliberate pause. "Because if that girl disappears, no one will ever prove anything." The air in the room stopped. Elias did not move. But something in him changed. It was subtle. The difference between a man sitting in a chair and a predator that has just heard a threat. He raised his head slowly. "If she disappears," he said, his voice so low that Lady Ivy had to resist the urge to step away from the window, "I will tear this castle down stone by stone." No emotion, no visible anger, only the cold, absolute statement of someone who was not making a threat, but describing a certainty. Lady Ivy kept her back to him for a moment longer than was comfortable. Then she turned around, the smile back in place. "What an interesting conversation," she said. "I'll have your room prepared for one more day." Elias stood. "That won't be necessary. We leave at first light." He left the room without waiting for an answer. He returned to his chambers. But he did not sleep. The sky was still dark when Elias woke. It was not a sound that woke him, nor movement. It was absence. The wolf inside him reacted at once. Elias got up. He pulled on his tunic in haste and crossed the room in long strides. He went down the castle stairs with barely any awareness of his own movements, his mind already several steps ahead of his body as he tested the air in every corridor, every passage, every stone archway. Nothing. Her absence was too clear. She was not in the castle. By the time he reached the courtyard, the sky was beginning to pale at the horizon. The first gray light of morning touched the battlements, and the air was cold, still, far too empty for the feeling growing inside his chest. Elias stopped in the middle of the courtyard. He inhaled deeply. There. Faint. Mixed with the scent of wet earth and damp wood, but unmistakable. She had passed through there. He turned his head toward the main gate. She left. The thought came to him clear and final. For one moment his jaw clenched hard. She ran. Or... His eyes narrowed slightly. Lady Ivy. Perhaps she had decided to test his limits. Perhaps she had sent Alina away in the middle of the night, believing that would solve the problem quietly and elegantly. If that is what happened... The thought remained unfinished. Because the answer had already taken shape before he even finished thinking it. She will pay for it. Or maybe not Lady Ivy. Perhaps Alina had simply been afraid. Perhaps she had believed that running would solve something. Elias let out a short breath. The wolf inside him was already on its feet, alert, furious at the growing distance between them. He turned without hesitation. The stables were silent at that hour, the horses already restless at his arrival before the doors had even been fully opened. Elias walked straight to the first animal strong enough for a long road, untied the reins and saddled the horse with quick, precise movements. When he finished, he mounted without stopping to think twice. She left alone. In the middle of the night, on foot, he thought. Elias pulled on the reins, his golden eyes fixed on the castle gate, as a quiet, dangerous certainty settled inside him. Enough. He nudged the horse forward. I'm going after her. The words came out low, almost like a thought spoken aloud. And there is nothing in this castle, and no one, who will stop me. The horse shot down the road as the gate opened. And her trail, that scent his wolf had memorized since the night in the clearing, carried through the morning wind in thin, persistent threads, guiding him into the forest. She had not gone far. Not yet. He turned the horse onto the road and rode on, without looking back at the gates disappearing behind him, without thinking about the counselors who would wake and find his room empty. The forest closed in on both sides of the road. Her trail grew a little stronger. She was ahead of him, alone in the darkness, with a small bundle, worn shoes, and that quiet, steady anger he had seen in her eyes on the battlements, the anger of someone who does not bend easily. She heard the horse before she saw it. Alina stopped in the middle of the road and stood perfectly still, and her intuition told her, with inconvenient and absolute clarity, that she knew exactly who was coming down that road. The horse drew nearer, and Elias dismounted. He walked toward her with that deliberate calm she had already learned to recognize as one of his defining traits, unhurried, with no visible urgency, as though he had all the time in the world. His golden eyes met hers. One corner of his mouth shifted slightly. It was not a full smile, just the beginning of one. "You always run," he said. His voice was not loud, nor was it harsh. But there was a dangerous calm in it, as if he had been chasing her all night and had finally stopped pretending to be patient. Alina did not answer. She only looked at him. The wind along the road lifted a few loose strands of her hair, and for a moment neither of them spoke. The silence felt too full. Elias stepped closer. "I need you to trust me, Alina." She kept her gaze lowered. "Why did you leave?" he continued, his voice softer now. "Please, say something." Alina tightened her fingers in the fabric of her dress. Then she lowered her head. "Because I'm just a servant." The words came out almost as a whisper. "I'm not a wolf. I can't be your mate." Elias looked at her for a moment. Then he slowly shook his head. "You are far more than that." She did not answer. "Why did you leave?" he insisted. "Did Lady Ivy send you away? Or do you really not want me?" Alina raised her eyes. "I don't want you." A lie. She felt the word cut through her chest before she had even finished saying it. It is better to lie, better than getting tangled in something that could end with her dead, or put the other maid still in the castle at risk. Elias studied her for a moment, then he took a small step toward her. I don't believe you. She drew in a deep breath. Please, let me go. I can't. The answer came instantly. No matter what happened, I can protect you. Alina let out a small, humorless laugh. I am nothing to you. His golden eyes sharpened. You are simply everything to me. The words hung between them, and before she could answer, Elias leaned in. The kiss came firm and unexpected. Alina tried to resist for a second, but her body betrayed her. Her hands found his chest, and instead of pushing him away, she ended up pulling him closer. The kiss deepened, heavy with all the tension that had been building, with everything neither of them had managed to say since the night of the ritual. When they pulled apart, her breathing was unsteady. Alina opened her eyes slowly. You were right. Elias frowned faintly. About what? She let out a small breath. My body begs for you. Elias gave a low laugh. Alina, I dream about you every night. His eyes remained fixed on hers. And I know you dream about me too. He moved a little closer. And as long as you keep denying the bond between mates, it's only going to get worse for both of us. The silence returned, hotter now, heavier. I need you to trust me, he said again. For a moment, Alina only looked at him. Then she grabbed his tunic and kissed him again, this time without hesitation. When they broke apart, she was still standing far too close. Why do you think your wolf recognized me, if I'm only human? Elias brushed his hand slowly over her face. I'm looking for that answer. He took a deep breath. My counsel is too. Then you don't know. Not yet. His golden eyes turned serious again. Now tell me the truth. He tilted his head slightly. You don't want me, or was it Lady Ivy? Alina stayed silent for a moment. Then she sighed. It was Lady Ivy. Her voice came out softer now. But I'm afraid for the other maids. Don't worry about that, Elias said at once. I'll take care of everything. She looked at him for a moment. The silence that followed was different from all the others before it. Elias said nothing for a moment. He only looked at her with that quiet, absolute attention. I know you're afraid, he said, his voice low. Not of what I am, of what this means. She did not answer right away. She kept looking at him with eyes carrying the weight of everything that had happened. What does it mean? She asked softly. That you won't be able to keep pretending you don't want me anymore. The silence returned. Warmer this time. Alina slid her hand slowly across his chest, just leaving it there, fingers spread over the fabric, as if checking something she needed to confirm by touch. Then she pulled. It was not gentle. Her fingers closed around his collar and yanked him down, and before he had time to say anything, she was up on her toes and her mouth had found his. Elias made a low sound against her lips. Surprise, satisfaction, both at once, and his hands went to her waist with a firmness that held no hesitation, pulling her closer before reason had any chance to weigh in. She came without resistance. She came with that particular surrender of someone who had stopped fighting herself, and he discovered in that instant that it was the most devastating thing he had ever felt. The forest closed around them. He stopped. He looked at her for a second. Only a second. Just long enough to confirm that she was really here, not running. And there was something in his golden eyes that was not the Alpha King, not authority, not anything she had learned to fear. It was only a man looking at the one person who had made the wolf inside him halt an entire ritual. and then he kissed her again, heat rising through her chest before spreading outward. The moss was soft beneath her back. The warmth of him was impossible to fight. Her hands learned the shape of his shoulders. His mouth learned her throat. There was one exact spot, just beneath her collarbone, where his lips lingered a second longer than necessary, and the sound that escaped her was involuntary and did not regret itself. The silence that followed was the kind that held no emptiness. Alina was lying with her head on his chest, her breathing slowly returning, her eyes closed against the light that had begun to grow in the canopy above, while the world kept moving on, without either of them paying any attention. His arm was around her shoulders, firm, still. "Do you still want to run?" he asked. His voice was rougher now, more rested. Alina was silent for a moment. "No," she said. That was all. But that single word carried everything it had cost her to say it, and he heard every part of it. His hand moved in her hair, just a small gesture, fingers sliding through it lightly. And they stayed like that as the light grew. Starvale appeared on the horizon late that afternoon. Alina was on the horse with him the entire way back. "And Lady Ivy?" she asked. She felt the muscles in his arm tighten slightly around her. "I'll handle that." The main hall of Lady Ivy's castle was quiet when Elias entered. She was seated, her posture flawless, her hands folded, her face wearing the mask she had spent years constructing. Elias did not sit. "Lady Ivy." "Your Majesty." Her voice was perfect, controlled. "I imagine you have come. You sent my maid away," he said. It was not an accusation. It was confirmation. Lady Ivy held his gaze. "I made a decision I believed necessary for—" "You interfered with the maid of an Alpha King," Elias said, his voice cutting across hers with the kind of calm that was always more dangerous than any raised volume. "The law of the pack has existed long enough for you to know what that means." The silence that settled over the room had weight. "I could kill you for it," he said. "You know that." Lady Ivy did not blink, but the mask on her face had tightened ever so slightly. "I won't." A pause. "Not because the law does not allow it, because Alina does not want it." His golden eyes stayed fixed on hers. "And what she wants matters to me more than anything you could offer or threaten." Lady Ivy remained still. "But you will lose," he continued, in the tone of someone not announcing punishment, only describing a reality already decided. "The right to negotiate with any kingdom allied to Starvale without my approval. 2 border territories, which will be placed under neutral administration, and the protection of Starvale's swords that our agreement guaranteed. Something you needed more than I did, and we both know it." He let the silence stand for a moment. "Men of Starvale will remain assigned to this castle, not to protect you, so that I know everything that happens here." Lady Ivy looked at him with those unreadable eyes. "Is that all?" she asked. "That is mercy," Elias said. "Because it is what Alina asked for." She looked at him for a long moment. "Understood," she said at last. Elias inclined his head, the smallest gesture of someone ending a conversation, and turned to leave. Alina was in the courtyard when Lyra came running. The hug was far too fierce for someone her size. Alina stood still for a second inside it. "I knew it," Lyra said against her shoulder. "I knew it would work out. You knew nothing. I knew everything." Marta appeared behind her wearing the expression of someone very clearly trying to look as though she had not been crying, failing completely. "So it's true," Marta said. "You're leaving with him." "I am." Marta crossed her arms. "And us?" Alina looked at the two of them. Lyra with her eyes still shining, Marta trying to seem indifferent with steadily less success. "You're coming with me," Alina said. Lyra's mouth fell open. "You'll be my ladies-in-waiting," Alina said. "If you want to." The silence lasted 2 seconds. Lyra hugged both of them again, this time with twice the force, and Marta decided at that moment that there was absolutely nothing wrong with crying. Later, when Elias found her in the corridor, and she told him what she had done, he simply looked at her. "You want your friends as your ladies-in-waiting?" "Yes." "All right." She blinked. "Just like that?" "I told you that you would have everything you want," he said. "Exactly the way you want it." Alina looked at him for a second. "Elias. Alina. You do know that when you say things like that," she said, in a voice that tried to sound dry and did not entirely succeed, "it becomes very hard to keep pretending I don't like you." The smile that spread across his face was slow. The mating ritual took place on the first night in Starvale. There was no crowd, no bonfires, no drums. There was the inner chamber of the castle, ancient stone, candles, the silence of the elders standing in a semicircle with the expressions of those who understand they are witnessing something that does not happen twice. Elias stood before her. His eyes met Alina's. "Are you going to run?" he asked. His voice was low. Only for her. The corner of her mouth shifted. "Not this time." The eldest elder spoke the words. Alina did not fully understand the language, but the weight of every syllable reached her bones in a way that needed no translation. There was something there that was more than ceremony. It was recognition. When the words ended, the silence had changed. Elias lifted a hand and slowly moved her hair away from her shoulder, the gesture of someone who understood the weight of what he was about to do, and felt no need to rush to it faster than necessary. His fingers traced the curve of her neck with an attention that made the air catch in her throat. His eyes met hers one last time. She nodded. He lowered his head. The bite came with a pain that was not what she had expected. It came like a wave, starting at the point of contact and radiating outward in every direction all at once, through her chest, her arms, her spine, all the way to her fingertips. As if every part of her body were being rewritten at once, from the inside out, in ink that had not existed before. And inside that pain there was something else. A bond. Tangible. As real as the floor beneath her feet. A thread of heat that established itself between her and him with the solidity of something that had been waiting to exist for far longer than either of them had been alive. She felt his wolf. Her legs gave out without warning. She felt his arms before she even realized she was falling. They closed around her with that firm steadiness that did not squeeze but did not let go either, holding her weight with an ease that, in any other moment, she would have commented on. "I've got you," he said. His voice was close. Very close. His warmth was everywhere. And the thread between them pulsed soft and steady, like a second heartbeat. Alina let the darkness come. She woke to golden sunlight. She stared at her hands. Something was different, not visible, not obvious. But it was there, a new awareness of the space around her, of the air, of the sound of footsteps in the corridor outside, which she could hear with a clarity that was slightly unsettling, too clear to be normal. She blinked. Elias was in the chair beside the bed, not asleep, just there, his elbows on his knees with the expression of someone who had stayed awake all night and did not regret it. "Good morning," he said. His voice was rougher than usual. "How long?" she asked. "All night." Alina touched her shoulder with 2 fingers. She felt the mark, faint, already healed, as if it had closed far too quickly to be natural. "You seem different," she said. "You do too." "What happened to me?" she asked at last. "When you bit me?" "I felt something." "I felt it too," Elias said. "The wolf felt you in return." She looked at him. Is that normal? He was silent for a moment. No, he said simply. The counselors were gathered when Elias entered the council chamber. Aldrich stood before Elias could sit down. There was something on the elder's face that was not exactly concern. It was that particular expression of someone who has just discovered something that changes every calculation at once. Your Majesty. Aldrich chose his words with the care of someone weighing them before speaking. The elders spent the night analyzing the ritual. And? Karan leaned slightly forward. The bond between mates is well known. Everyone here understands it. But what happened last night was not only a mating ritual. A pause. The intensity of her reaction. The way she felt the wolf before she fainted. The speed with which the mark healed. The clarity of the aura she left in the chamber. Aldrich continued. We believe she may be a dormant wolf. The silence that followed carried considerable weight. Dormant, Elias repeated. Someone with shifter blood who for some reason never awakened, Aldrich said, with the careful restraint of someone who does not want to claim more than can be confirmed. The aura she carries, Your Majesty, is not human. She is powerful, Corin said. In a way we are still trying to measure. The silence stretched on. And there is more, Aldrich said, in the tone of someone saving the most important part for last. Elias looked at him. You are stronger this morning, the elder said. We felt it the moment you entered this room. The alpha aura is denser, more present. A pause. She completed you in a way none of us expected. You became stronger with her. The room went completely still. Elias looked at the table for a moment. Keep investigating her past, he said at last. Who her parents were. How she came to Lady Ivy's castle. Everything that exists to find. Aldrich nodded. We've already begun. And when you find something, Elias stood, you come to me first. He left through the corridor. He stopped for a second beside the window overlooking the inner garden. The wolf inside him was calm, calmer than it had been in years. That constant restlessness, that search he had not always been able to name, had settled with the solidity of something that had found where it belonged. She was in the garden when he found her, sitting on a stone bench with the morning sun in her hair. Elias sat beside her without saying a word. They stayed like that for a moment. The counselors told me you became stronger, she said, without opening her eyes. It's true, because of you. He spent a moment looking at her face lit by sunlight, at the mark on her shoulder visible at the edge of her dress. I told you, he began, that you were not just a servant. And even if you were, he continued, his voice low, direct and honest, I would not care. She held her breath. I do not care about your past. His eyes stayed on hers. I do not care if you are a servant, if you are a wolf, if you are human, if the name you carry is not considered good enough by any court in this kingdom. He leaned in slightly. What matters to me is your essence, what you are when you are not trying to make yourself invisible. A small pause. Alina looked at him. The woman who asked for mercy for someone who did not deserve it, who wanted her friends close before wanting anything else for herself. The sun was warm on her shoulders. The mark on her shoulder pulsed softly, once, as it always did now. I love you, he said, more than anything that exists in this kingdom. The garden went quiet around them. Alina lifted a hand to his face slowly, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw, the corner of his mouth, with the attention of someone who had learned there was time now, and no need to hurry. I love you too, she said. The smile that appeared on his face was the fullest she had ever seen.